Hello and welcome. Today I will talk about a very interesting topic. The topic: what was Hitler's real ideology? Or better, as what did Hitler see himself? Because nowadays we often draw the conclusion and put moral standards of modernity onto Hitler. For example, many people say he was a capitalist. Many people say he was a socialist, and both sides have arguments for it, obviously. But as what did Hitler see himself? Well, Hitler talked about himself as a third positionist, a third way, a way of Weltanschauung. To understand how this third way came to power, we have to understand the history of Germany, which was always quite a socialist thinking country, at least in the 19th century. There were many philosophers and intellectual thinkers who were quite socialist. And this didn't change, especially after the First World War. In fact, it got more intense, with people in the Weimar Republic seeing capitalism fail at the markets, hyperinflation, etc. That brought many people to be more socialist, especially worker parties clashed with normal socialist parties, and more people basically got the thought of socialism and thought it is a good thing. But at the same time, there were more and more people actually being nationalist, because this was quite typical during that time that many people, especially in Germany, were very nationalistic. So they wanted Germany to be first and all other countries to be second. But at the same time, they were socialists. So here's the interesting thing: Hitler's party name basically had nationalism and socialism both in it. And this is basically the ground idea of the third way, to have nationalism combined with socialism. But Hitler's way of socialism was different. It was not the typical socialism, because he saw typical socialism as flawed as well as capitalism. Capitalism was bad for him because it was Jewish thinking for him. It was the individual, tried to make money, was money greedy, thought firstly about himself. There was the capitalist mindset out of his perspective, which was Jewish. So this was absolutely evil for him. Socialism, the idea was good to him, but he was very much against the internationalism of socialism, which he also saw as a Jewish thing. So Hitler created his own socialism, which was German socialism, or National Socialism, which is basically socialism, but just for one nation, without internationalism, which was about autarky, etc., self-sufficiency. That were his main points of his socialism. I also always like to call it race socialism, because it really focused on the races, on the difference. So I will directly read a quote for you. Hitler's appeal lay in his promise of a new path, one that rejected the failures of both the liberal capitalist West and the Bolshevik East, offering instead a nationalist utopia. This third way resonated with Germans who felt betrayed by the existing political spectrum. Hitler's disdain for capitalism was rooted in his anti-Semitic worldview, which portrayed Jews as the architects of a global financial system designed to exploit Aryan nations. Here, the next quote. The Western democracy of today is the forerunner of Marxism, which without it would not be thinkable. It provides this world plague with the culture in which its germs can spread. In its most extreme form, democracy leads to monopoly, and monopoly is the financial final triumph of the Jew. This was what Hitler said in Mein Kampf. Here Hitler links capitalism through democracy to Marxism. suggesting that both are stages in a Jewish plot for world domination. He saw capitalism's emphasis on individual profit and free market as a mechanism for Jewish financiers to dominate economies, a belief reinforced by anti-Semitic stereotypes like those in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, a probably forged document he frequently refers to. So I will directly give you another quote from Ian Kershaw. Hitler's hatred of capitalism was inseparable from his anti-Semitism. He viewed the stock market, international trade, and banking as tools of Jewish control, which he sought to dismantle. So what we can definitely say is that Hitler was by no means a capitalist. Right the opposite, he hated capitalism completely. But now I want to give you another quote, which is a little bit too long to show it to you, but I will read it for you and tell you the source of it. This is what Hitler said in Collection of Speeches, page 1213. While now in Soviet Russia the millions are ruined and are dying, Chicherin, and with him a staff of over 200 Soviet Jews, travels by express train through Europe, visits the Kabets, watches dancers perform for his pleasure, lives in the finest hotels, and does himself better than the millions whom once you thought you must fight as bourgeois. The 400 Soviet commissars of Jewish nationality, they do not suffer. The thousands upon thousands of sub-commissars, they do not suffer. No, all the treasures which the proletarian in his madness took from the bourgeoisie in order to fight so-called capitalism, they have all gone into their hands. Once the worker appropriated the purse of the landed proprietor who gave him work, he took the rings, the diamonds, and rejoiced that he had now got the treasures which before only the bourgeoisie possessed. But in his hands they are dead things. They are veritable deaf gold. They are no profit to him. He is banished into his wildness, and one cannot feed oneself on diamonds. For a morsel of bread he gives millions in objects of value. But the bread is in the hand of the state central organization, and this is the hands of the Jews. So everything that the common man thought that he was winning for himself flows back again to his seducers. And now, my dear fellow countrymen, do you believe that these men, who with us are going the same way, will end the revolution? They do not wish the end of the revolution, for they do not need it. For them, the revolution is milk and honey. Thus, we can see that he not only saw capitalism being controlled by the Jew, but also Marxism. Out of his perspective, the Jew thrived while the normal workers suffered under the Soviet rule. Thus, they would want a permanent revolution because, like this, they could exploit the workers more and profit from their suffering. So, we elaborated a little bit the situation which basically faced Hitler, where he rejected capitalism on the one hand as something Jewish mentality, profit greed, etc. And on the other hand, he rejected Jewish Marxism, as he called it, also because he thought it was controlled by the Jews to exploit the workers again. So capitalism exploited the workers, and Jewish Marxism exploited the workers for him. So for him, there was only one way, basically to create a national form of socialism that was controlled by Germans and not by Jews. This was the key for him. For this, I will quote again. Now, my comrades, you have personally seen this paradise of workers and peasants with your own eyes in a country whose vastness and fertility could feed the whole world, a poverty reigns that we Germans cannot imagine. This is the result of nearly 25 years of Jewish rule, which, as Bolshevism, basically reflects the basest form of capitalism. The bearers of this system are the same in both instances, Jews and again Jews. This is what Hitler said in his speech again. So you can read all of those quotes and look into Hitler's ideology. And yet you have historians who claim that Hitler was a capitalist. This is really perplexed to me. While I understand some reasons for it, for example, the idea of reprivatization, this is a common mistake because by no means Hitler had any liking for capitalism. He hated it as something Jewish. So, to counter these arguments, I won't go into that now, but I will do a separate video about the economy in the Third Reich, and there I will basically show why this reprivatization was not as capitalist as it may seem on the first glance, because if you look at it just on the first glance, you could say it is capitalistic. But if you look deeper into it, you understand that it is just basically it looks capitalistic, but in reality it is not. I will directly do the next quote. This community of Jewish capitalism and communism is nothing new to us old National Socialists, especially to you, my oldest comrades in arms. As before, during and after the First World War in our country, so today the Jews, and again only the Jews, have to be held responsible for tearing apart the nations. I will read you the next quote, which I won't show on the screen though, but again I will tell you the source of it. Hitler said this in the speeches of Adolf Hitler, April 1922 to August 1939, edited by Norman Hay Rice. We are enemies of the capitalist economic system for the explanation of the economically weak, with its unfair salaries, with its unseemly evaluation of a human being according to wealth and property instead of responsibility and performance. This quote reveals clearly Hitler's rejection of capitalism's focus on wealth and individualism, which he believed undermined the Aryan values of duty and community. Instead, he advocated for an economic system subordinated to the needs of the state, where industries would serve the nation's goals, particularly rearmament and territorial expansion, rather than private profit. The whole Volksgemeinschaft, people's community, should profit rather than the private person. Hitler's Third Way sought to combine elements of both capitalism and socialism while rejecting their perceived flaws, creating a system that prioritized the nation and the Aryan race above all else. National Socialism aimed to improve the productive capacity of private industry, a capitalist trait, while subordinating it to state control, a socialist trait, all within the framework of racial ideology that neither system embraced. I will read you directly the next quote, which comes from the same source as before. We are socialists. We are enemies of the capitalist economic system. But we are not socialists in the sense of international Marxism. We are socialists because we see in socialism the only possibility of maintaining our racial existence and regarding our political freedom and economical independence. This is what Hitler said in another speech. So, Hitler's form of the Third Way rejects the class struggle and internationalism of socialism, but therefore is for racial unity and the Volksgemeinschaft, which basically should abandon the class struggle. So it should basically defeat or get rid of class distinctions or class division. At the same time, it rejected individualism in favor to working towards the state. So why does National Socialism fit the third way? Well, it rejected the classical capitalism versus socialism. It took from both forms their good things out of Hitler's view and rejected the both things, so changing them fundamentally and creating a third synthesis of those two different economic system or ideologies into a new one, a new, for Hitler, better one. I will directly give you the next quote. We have founded a new movement, a movement which stands neither on the right nor the left, but which takes its stand on the basis of the eternal laws of nature and the eternal truths of life. We are neither capitalists nor communists. We are National Socialists. The Nazi Party's 25-point program, adopted in 1920, reflects this third way ideology. Point 13 calls for the nationalization of all trusts, a socialist demand, while point 17 advocates for a land reform suitable to our national requirements, which allows for private property, a capitalist principle, but only under state oversight. Point 11, which demands the abolition of unearned income and the breaking of interest slavery, directly attacks capitalist financial systems. Yet the program never endorsed the abolition of private property outright, as Marxism would, for example. William L. Shearer, in The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, said to this, a mixture of nationalist, socialist, and anti-capitalist ideas designed to appeal to a broad base while rejecting both Marxism and liberalism, a classic third way approach. Hitler's emphasis on autarky, basically economic self-sufficiency, further distinguishes his ideology as a third way. Unlike capitalism, which stands for global trade, or socialism, which often supports international solidarity, National Socialism prioritized economic independence to prepare Germany for war and territorial expansion. In a speech, Hitler said, "We National Socialists have never sought to participate in the world economy on the terms of the capitalists or the communists. Our goal is autarky, a Germany that stands alone, free from the chains of international finance and the lies of international Marxism." Finally, the Nazi concept of the Volksgemeinschaft, people's community, is also part of his third way. By rejecting class struggle in favor of racial unity, Hitler believed that class divisions were a Jewish invention meant to weaken the German nation, and he sought to replace them with a racially homogeneous society where all Aryans worked together under the Führer's leadership. In a speech on May 1st, 1933, celebrating the abolition of trade unions, Hitler proclaimed, "The class struggle of Marxism divides the nation, but the National Socialist idea of the people's community unites it. We have destroyed the old class barriers, not to create a classless society, but to create a society where every German serves the nation as a whole." Some historians argue that labeling National Socialism as a third way oversimplifies it. It basically oversimplifies its contradictions. For instance, while Hitler rejected capitalism in theory, the Third Reich relied heavily on private industry to fuel its war machine, leading some to classify it as a form of a state capitalism. Historian Götz Alley, in Hitler's Beneficiaries, 2005, contends that the Nazi economy was more capitalist than socialist, as it preserved private property and allowed corporations to profit immensely from state contracts. End quote. However, this view overlooks the extent of state control over the economy, which aligns more closely with a third way model than with laissez-faire capitalism. I will quote Hitler again in a speech on January the 17th, 1922. Wherever we have risen 1,000 times against the regime of Wilhelm II, for the Marxists, we are still reactionary monarchists. Then he continues, start quote, wherever we fight against Bolshevism, and we are the only ones who truly fight. For the nationalists, we remain Bolsheviks, end quote. And then we start the next quote. Because of this, from left to right, there is nothing than lies. End quote. It is evident that he does not care to be labeled as right or left. He dismisses both sides as liars and has always been the direct enemy of his opponents. One could argue that he was both a revolutionary and a counter-revolutionary at the same time. It is clear that distortions from outsiders only cause confusion and should not be taken seriously. Instead, I will now attempt to illustrate how Hitler viewed himself. I consider this the only way to accurately determine what he truly was, as who could know better than himself? However, also this has to be taken with a grain of salt, since many things he said were pure propaganda. Some were true and some were just kind of lies or served a purpose. But I still think it is only fair to let him speak for himself in that instant. How did it become widely accepted that Hitler was a right-wing figure? Well, here the common saying is once again, and holds truth, history is written by the victors. Stalin in particular insisted on portraying Hitler as a capitalist. This portrayal emerged after Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, a strategic move to maintain Soviet soldiers' morale as they fought against soldiers representing a similar ideology. So, Jewish Marxism, or for the Marxists and the communists, for the Soviet Union themselves, for the proletariat, it would be very unfitting for them to fight against other socialists. So it was very much the idea to basically draw an enemy picture of Hitler as the opposite of us. So this was basically their target in portraying Hitler as a capitalist. In a speech on the 19th of November 1920, Hitler said, "We don't fight against right or left ideologies, but we take from both the best." So in the end, we can say that Hitler's ideology was basically the third way. It was not socialist in its normal form, nor was it capitalist. He hated normal socialism, international socialism, and capitalism. So it both as something created by the Jews to basically defeat the Aryan race, or at least to weaken them. So Hitler created National Socialism, a German form of socialism, which pursued the goals of no class distinction, no class division, but rather a unified Volksgemeinschaft, where the whole economy served the state. But there was still privatization in the country, so private owners could own companies as long as they played after the rules of the state. To understand why Hitler actually adopted that third world view, we have to understand his anti-Semitism and his idea of a Jewish world conspiracy. This is really fundamental to understand why Hitler actually was a third positionist, because he saw both the normal socialists and capitalists as players of the Jews and this Jewish mindset. So he created a National Socialism, which was a third-way ideology. I hope you liked the video. If you have any questions, recommendations, or just comments, write it down in the comments. I hope you could learn something today. If you disagree or agree, write it as well down in the comments, and I'm happy to have a discussion with you, and maybe we'll find out some new things together. So have a great day, and bye for now.